my global traveling companion from the 80s.
Yeah, it's been a while and we had
Yeah.
some good adventures.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you a little bit today and hear about how the Continental experience may have impacted what you do today. Is that the case?
Absolutely has, yeah, for sure. Um, I'm a college music professor now at a Christian university in Pennsylvania. And another experience that I have taken on about 7 or 8 years ago is teaching in the summers at a Christian music camp.
Uh,
And so, yeah, my time with Continentals really informs what I do.
and we covered some ground together in the 80s, didn't we? I mean, I was trying to
Absolutely.
think of all of them, but certainly continents are easy. We did Asia and Europe and Africa numerous times, and so um,
Some of those, and I was always one who liked those adventure tours, which is why I went with you the times I did, because you did too. Um, but a lot of what we were able to do was beyond church ministry. It was beyond, singing songs of encouragement to other believers. And I really did appreciate those opportunities.
which name a couple that had a big impact on you.
Oh, goodness. Um, I think of the Jesus Film Project partnership that I was part of, and certainly World Vision. Um, you know, being being in Africa, especially in the spring of 1985,
Mm.
in Ethiopia during the height of that famine there, and seeing kids die, you
Yeah,
know, and then coming back and um, having the slideshow in our concerts with those pictures of the little bloated bellies and the hurt and the pain and the disease, and the money we were able to raise to combat that. Um, and I hope through World Vision, reach people for Christ beyond meeting their physical needs.
right. Yeah, that was a powerful experience for all of us, but especially so, I think, for you and a few others when you went to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Um, that just the images from that are so striking to this day. I think of those.
Well, I can look at them and honestly still weep, wondering where are these kids today? You
Right,
know, did they
right,
make?
right. What give me some practical insight into how your continental experience shows up in your day to day with your students, etc. You've been teaching how long?
This is my 17th year at Messiah University.
Wow.
So it's the longest I've been in any one place in my entire life.
Hmm.
Wow. Which I thought of it that the other day and I was like, that's really hard to believe. But and I will confess that my understanding of my purpose here came only about 5 years ago. There was a massive change in my heart and in my experience here. I walked into one of my music theory classes not long after that and had what I would classify as a supernatural experience, and I will I will attest to having had a couple of those in my life.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible.
One in Romania, which you know about.
Yeah.
Uh, but I walked into my classroom and I lecture from the piano, from behind the piano. I put my books down on the piano and looked up, and instead of 2 dozen people, I saw 2 dozen, and I can't put a word to it. I can't describe what I saw, but it was, and God said very clearly to me, these are eternal souls.
Wow.
And I knew that I had to be more concerned for their eternal destiny. And from that point on, I began to react and interact differently with my students and my colleagues. And I began to pray for my students, which I hadn't done, oddly. Um, but the other thing that happened as a result is that students started knocking on my door unsolicited. Kids would come to me and say, I'm really struggling, or things at home are rough, or whatever. And they were asking for prayer or for some counsel or for some biblical wisdom. And I really didn't feel qualified, without specific training as a Christian counselor or as a pastor. So I turned to the Word of God. I did what I could to help, and I prayed with the students, and that's still happening. it's become very evident to me that the my understanding of the ministry of the Continental Singers, as I came to understand it later, is really where I am now. I think Continental Singers was a training ground. Of
Mm,
course, just stepping backwards a minute, I became a Christian between high school and college in that summer after high school, and I didn't have any formal discipleship
mm.
until I got to Continental Singers. So I had my formal discipleship there, and I had great mentors like you and other directors and staff and leadership. The Navigators program, and then the Continentals had their own program that we went through, and then of course directors all had their own ways of sharing and worshiping and in prayer time before concerts.
Okay.
So that was very formational for me. But then to be able to um, look at the ministry to Christians and to understand that, we all have something we're struggling with,
Mm.
whether it's some sort of personal baggage or whether it's some habitual sin or whatever it is, there's something we deal with, and we're here to help each other. And that was the theme of probably several concert programs
Right.
during the 80s that I was on. And I do turn back, to those themes and to that music. I listened to The Dreamer a lot. That was
Mm.
my very first tour, and just to remember to be faithful no matter what, no matter how difficult things might get. And I'm blessed; things haven't been super difficult in my life. Um, but it's also a way. It's given me a way to encourage students. Look at Joseph. Look at what happened in his life. Let's go through that together.
That's
So
powerful.
yeah, absolutely.
Talk a little bit about Korea.
Oh man, yeah. We
A lot of
couldn't.
people wouldn't know that you really were the founder of the Korean Continental ministry in that effort, and it was fun for me to be a partner with you, on the recordings and things like that as you started out. But how did that happen? What drew you to Korea?
Well, I honestly thought in my young Christian life, I thought if I were ever to be a missionary, I would probably go to Latin America because my mom grew up on the Texas-Mexico border, and all their workers at my granddad's farm were all Mexicans, and my mom and her family had lived in Bolivia for several years, and they all spoke Spanish fluently. And I just thought, maybe that's a connection. Um, I got to Korea in the summer of 1988 for I guess, the preliminary tour before the Olympics in the fall, and it was deeply impactful. It was like it was my first time to Asia. I had never expected to have a spiritual impact like that. Um, and again, I think that was the beginning of an understanding of ministry to the church, because Korea is a very Christian nation.
Right.
But to perform, to minister in public places there that summer for tens of thousands of people at a time, some of whom were engaged with what we were doing and some of whom could care less. I don't know. There was just something working in me. And then Che Yu-shin, who sponsored the fall tour, came to me at the end of the summer and he said, "You're Korean." I'm like, "What?" He said, "You're Korean. You seem to be Korean. You look Korean. You behave Korean." And I'm like, that makes no sense to me, but okay. Then he ended up sponsoring the fall tour, and I went on that tour as well during the actual Olympics in September. And I knew this was my place to go.
Wow.
And it was actually just the following February. The tour ended in early December, and by February of 1989, I was living in Seoul without having raised any missionary support or anything, but just knowing that I should be there and having the promise of Che Yu-shin that they would provide something, and they did. So, yeah, just the understanding that God's timing and God's providence were very real, and then in how he proved it all along the way during my time in Korea, even when things were strange and even when there was upheaval, and there was plenty of upheaval during my early years there, like all the protests and riots and tear gas and all the things I was able to encounter against my will sometimes, but that's the way that was. Um, yeah, and then as quickly as God put together the very first Korean Continentals tour, just evident, just totally evident. I mean, he brought the people. It's like I felt like I was doing nothing, and Chayushin had barely got the word out, and suddenly people were coming to interview and audition. And the one big prayer that I had was, God, please bring Korean leaders. Please bring Korean leaders. I don't know what I'm doing. It was my very first time to direct, and I was overseas doing it in a second language that I really didn't know at all. And he did. He brought three young men who ended up being part of leadership there for years each, so that I could actually step away after only 2 tours, which I feel like was miraculous. But in the meantime, we did that first CD. You came over and helped produce that with those singers. It wasn't a professional thing. It was just those singers. And the way that the Korean Continental singers have been imitated through other groups there, and then the things that those early members have gone on to do in ministry as pastors and as contemporary Christian music singers, all kinds of church and faith-based careers. Really, really wonderful to see.
Have you ever wished you could gift your life-changing Continental experience to someone else? Well, you can. Your monthly giving can make a huge impact for our teens all over the world. Did you know that this year, we'll have more than 20 Continental groups on the road, communicating in 7 different languages? The Continental story goes on, so keep writing your part of it by being on our support team. And our groups will say, thank you, in 7 different languages.